at Kellerman Consulting. Kellerman Consulting puts on these webinars periodically throughout the year to go over pertinent topics and timely discussions on matters affecting the food industry and also we'll do non-food and quality assurance issues as well. This specific webinar addresses dietary supplements, so it is going to be really in the food industry, food and beverage. One thing I would like to note is that we have a handout as part of this webinar. It is a checklist for master manufacturing records. If you're a dietary supplement producer or thinking about becoming one, that handout may be of use to you. As this webinar goes on, one of my favorite things about these webinars is the ability to answer questions in real time. So there is a chat function. Phoebe, my wife, has put a message on the chat. If you have any questions, anything you would like explained or talked about in greater depth, please do let me know. I love the ability to delve into these things, and it's very helpful for me when you do that. Otherwise, we'll jump right in. For this webinar, the topics we're going to discuss are the use of certificates of analysis or certificates of conformity. We'll talk about why certificates of conformity really shouldn't be used in these programs, but they exist and we want to cover those. We're going to talk about incoming testing programs. We're going to talk about that MMR and how it lines up with testing, hold release programs, laboratory and QC, which might do incoming, in-process testing and finished product testing. And we'll focus on that finished product testing as a verification of what happens to finished products when we're done with it and how we can prove that we made things correctly. One thing I want to note, we came up with this webinar a little bit ago, but one of the things about this webinar that makes it a little special to me is that it's particularly timely. This webinar obviously is in August of 2025. There's been quite a bit of evidence recently, very recently in the last few weeks, that there's a ramping up of expectation around testing. So while these topics were already picked, you're going to find during this webinar, we spend a lot of time on testing. Some of these things ended up a little out of order. However, we think it's really important to express what is going on with testing and those testing expectations. We do not speak for any regulators. However, we can anecdotally address things that we have seen and heard from our clients in real time. I quickly wanted to discuss the fact that on our website, we have videos that we produced over the last few years to explain aspects of operation. And we did an entire series on dietary supplements. And it is background. We're not going to get into the background of what a dietary supplement is or any of the sort of like basics. This is going to be quite intermediate or advanced. If you are new to dietary supplements, if you're watching this and you feel that you would like to understand more about what a dietary supplement is, this QR code here will take you to the website. You can go to kellermanconsulting.com and find these videos. They are free and available. I did check them out just to see what I said previously, and I'm quite proud in the context of what is going on currently, what was said even a year ago or so, still topical. Dietary supplements are controversial. They remain controversial. People have strong opinions about them. Regulators are very strongly enforcing regulations. And so there's a lot of action here. And if you're going to get into the dietary supplement business or you're in it, these are wild times. So let's jump into where things are currently. And that, again, really revolves around the testing of dietary supplements and confirming the identities of what we're using and the fact that we're able to correctly make dietary supplements. And so here we have our first slide. What is the right amount of testing? Well, the correct answer to that, the separate of costs, the right answer is that we test everything when it comes in the door. We have designated tests or analysis while we're making dietary supplements. And where did those go? In my mind, as someone who was a QA manager for a dietary supplement organization, it was each step where the composition of what I'm making changes. So where I'm liquefying, where we have a mixing step, if we are tableting or compressing, if we're cooking or something like that, something similar to cooking in dietary supplements, each time those are done, we are very concerned. So we have our testing coming in the door, so we know what it is that we are using as part of our dietary supplement um, products. So the vitamins, minerals, essential elements, whatever it is, the active ingredients, we know that they are correct coming in the door. But each time that I manipulate the ingredients in towards a work in process or a finished process, I need to understand, are those vitamins and minerals and essential elements, um, uh, are the active ingredients being altered by the other ingredients in there? Is there, and it's known for vitamins that there is a shielding effect of some vitamins over others. So the presence of multiple vitamins may reduce the ability of the body to uptake the other, the lesser vitamin. And when things like that happen, we need to confirm throughout our process that we are making it correctly, such that the supplement has the intended effect. So ideally, I would be doing that throughout my process where I'm making changes. And then finally, at the end. So finished product testing. So that's what is ideal. And this is what is controversial. What we are hearing from our clients in industry is that the regulators are coming in and kind of telling people that's what they expect to see. I used to tell people that's like gold standard, but the word gold might be less applicable here. It kind of sounds like it might be the standard. We do want to look into the rules carefully here because, candidly, as we're going to see, the code doesn't actually specifically say that. However, if the regulators are going to hold people to that, if those are what the rules are going to be, then that's what it's going to be. So let's just quickly look at this testing grid, and then we'll look at what the rules say carefully. So I have this testing grid because I mentioned we have incoming, in process, and finished product testing. I have a couple of examples of what could be done at each step. So for incoming, we're really trying to establish proof of identity. We could do nutrient testing incoming, but usually we save that to the end. The proof of identity testing, these are types of identity testing. There are several different ways to approach this, but there are assay tests when you're looking at percentage purity of things. We have other types of purity tests for things that cannot be assay tested. And then there are just other basic types of identity testing, depending on the equipment that you're using. The frequency at this kind of gold standard level would be every single lot. So when I get something in the door, I test it. That would be ideal. We're going to see that we need to hold and quarantine the ingredients when they come in the door. If we're testing, certainly you hold while you're testing, but we're supposed to be evaluating everything anyway. So whether or not we test, there should be a hold and quarantine. But if we are doing incoming testing on everything that comes in the door, that would be a effective answer if someone asks how we're evaluating product. In process testing, well, there's any number of things that we can do in process. I had in the previous slide statistical process controls. That would be trending ongoing of things like maybe temperature or acidity. I have listed here if I had a probe. If I'm doing weight checks every few minutes or tablet counts, things like that, I can trend those as statistical process controls. For liquid dietary supplements, fill rates are oftentimes statistical process controls. That would not necessarily just be for dietary supplement purposes, but really quality, not overfilling the bottles is crucial, or not underfilling. Other types of tests, we could do more purity testing, as I just mentioned. If I wanted to do purity testing throughout to make sure, or not just even purity testing, the levels of the components, looking for things like shielding effects and breakdown of those elements. I put the word purity here, but we could think of it as like status or efficacy checks of the work in process. Those tests could be pulled at any point in the process. If I have the ability to do it quickly on site, then I could just do one quick test and make sure everything is as I expected it to be. I listed some of the other types of devices that I see done in process, so gas chromatography, flashpoint testing. Those are common in liquids, but could be used if they are applicable. Those tests could be used to prove some identity. Like a flashpoint is a way to fingerprint. Gas chromatography would fingerprint what I'm dealing with. So if I had a known a known quantity I was looking for, my in-process testing could confirm it. And then any QMS evaluation. So we have a quality management system. If I have specific quality tests, all of those can be presented as my in-process evaluations to show that I have control. That is every time we have a production event. Now, I just want to point out the incoming testing for each lot. Well, if I'm buying something like vitamin B12 and I need 50 pounds, but that might last 6 months, each lot, I mean, that might be one test a half a year or one test a year, whereas my in-process evaluations might happen, 75 production days over that time frame. So I have one incoming test for each component, but I have dozens of in-process tests for the materials while they are in process. And then for the finished product testing, that is going to be each lot of finished product. Each lot of finished product testing is probably going to be closer to that each production event of in-process testing, whereas my incoming testing program is potentially going to be less, depending on how quickly I use those ingredients. If this sounds like a lot of testing, it really is. That is sort of the basic standard, and we need to talk quickly about what is the cost of all of this, because that is ultimately, we're going to end up talking a lot about cost here, because that is the sort of unmentioned issue in all of this. For facilities that have a laboratory in-house and have already spent probably in the millions of dollars developing a lab, getting the equipment, hiring the personnel to run those labs, the cost of these tests individually are quite small, because I've already invested all the money in that lab. And so the next test is merely the materials to run that next test, maybe the time. But if I'm paying someone a salary and they're sophisticated enough to run the high levels, the high tech equipment to do these tests, I'm probably paying a lot of money every hour, whether they're working or not. So that next test is simply the use of the thing I already paid for. And so a testing program in a facility that has a lab, not too overwhelming. But if we are sending these things out for third-party testing, the price and the cost of this becomes astronomical very quickly. And so traditionally, I have given the message to our clients of like, hey, do the best you can, but you need to be doing the best you can, right? You need to have a very good attempt at doing as much testing as you possibly can while still maintaining your business. If regulators are coming in and saying, hey, we want testing on everything, they are telling people they don't care how expensive it is, that suck it up or get out of this business. And as a consultant, that is not my message to people, to tell them do not get into this industry. But the cost of testing is a prohibitive cost in dietary supplements. This is the problem with people trying to get into dietary supplements. And I want to say that, idealistically or ideologically, people get into dietary supplements because they believe they are helpful to consumers. And so a lot of people that we have worked with are very passionate about what they are doing, and that's lovely. But in the regulatory environment, we are a science-based food safety system and dietary supplement safety system, and the testing is how we prove things. And so if there's an emphasis on testing everything, it will run people out of business. That's just the truth of it. We hate to see it. I hope that's not the case for many businesses, but what we are really talking about is, can a business be run profitably with this testing? So let's quickly look at the FDA requirements. I put them up here. There are an extensive amount of FDA requirements here. I did list the one that is pertinent to this testing, one that has come up as a touch point in recent regulatory actions. So we have 21 CFR 111.75. The overarching regulation is 21 CFR 111. It's been in place for, gosh, I think going on about 40 years. So it's not a new regulation, and this is not new itself. However, this is how this is applied has potentially changed. So what it is saying here, we don't have to read every word of it, but it's basically saying the components you use have to be evaluated for specification, and there's two ways to do it. The first is to conduct testing, which is this incoming testing program, or relying on certificates of analysis. But at the end of that little two there, it says provided that. And this is where the rub comes in. Because, yeah, I'm allowed to use COAs instead of testing. However, I have to establish why I'm doing that. So I have to have a really strong supplier approval program. I then have to check the COAs very carefully and prove that checking the COAs is an adequate replacement for testing. And then the most important piece here, this little D down there at the bottom, you periodically reconfirm a supplier certificate of analysis, which means I'm going to test this stuff and compare the results to those COAs. The word periodically, well, to my mind, periodically would mean at least every year, possibly a little more frequently. If the word periodically is going to become, no, you're going to check every time. So what's the point of a COA? Then that means every time. Periodically would be weekly. Or however often you get it. And getting into that fight with regulators is going to be a losing fight. I don't really know where the dust is going to settle. But traditionally, we had been giving advice in line with this, which was, hey, use COAs at the beginning. Make sure you're checking them carefully, but definitely do your finished product testing. If you need to prepare yourself for the next regulatory inspection, there needs to be a very good evaluation of what you're doing with incoming. We cannot just shrug and say, hopefully everyone's cool with it and expect that regulators are just going to accept whatever you're doing. To go along with this, I put a second regulation from 21 CFR 111, which is 315, and it is the laboratory controls. Now, this assumes that I have a lab, but even if we're using a third-party lab, they would have to follow these things. And what it basically comes down to is that you need to have a sampling plan. So how do I sample effectively for the lab tests that we're going to run? What are the criteria or the testing methods? And how do I, what is the criteria that I'm using to pick those methods? And how do I confirm that I actually did it in accordance with the criteria or those methods? So we really have to have a pretty strong check on the checks for dietary supplements. This, by the way, all the stuff we're talking about, packaging actually does apply. You don't need to necessarily do finished product testing or, expensive tests on packaging, but we do need to think through what kind of evaluations on packaging we want to have done so that we can prove that the packaging materials are also safe. So let's talk about certificates of analysis. I also, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have certificates of conformity. Let's talk about what that is, how it fits into certificates of analysis, when we get them, how we're checking them, how they fit into a testing program. So certificates of analysis are the written statements from our suppliers of the tests that they ran on these products. Now, it is my personal opinion that if I'm working with a good supplier and they are able to demonstrate over time that their certificates of testing, their certificates of analysis, the test results are correct and accurate, and I can match them to my production records and to any incoming tests I do, that should be good enough. It's my personal opinion that should be good enough. But I'm not the one going into facilities and telling them what is right and wrong. So we do give the advice that is a good start. The best practice at a basic level for evaluating incoming COAs. Now, those can be sent to you via email. They can be in paper, so they can come off the truck with the product. Sometimes you'll see that like envelopes or things that the truck drivers give you that have COAs in them, or they are part of the shipping paperwork. There is no rules for what format the COAs need to be in. If you get them and you file them and you can pull them up, you're in good shape. There should be check marks, like actual check marks and probably initials on those COAs for each thing that I'm looking at. So if I have told someone I'm purchasing your product and I'm looking for 5 specs on there, on your COA, 5 different test results, I should have check marks next to those with the initials of who that person is. That's my written record that I looked at it. This is something that constantly is an issue that comes up in industry, which is that I have the COAs, I store them, but if there is no writing on them, then there is no record that they were looked at. And frankly and candidly, a lot of people collect COAs and don't look at them, and that they're of no value if they're not examined. So if you are collecting COAs, get a blue or black ink pen and check off what you are looking at. It only adds an extra couple seconds. That would be how you demonstrate to a regulator that I have confirmed that I looked at this and it was correct. And you can circle any of them that are question marks or out of specs, and you can write a message, contact supplier. Those things are really good for COAs. A certificate of conformity, which is like a certificate of analysis, and some of you listening may have gotten certificates of conformity in the past. Those are statements that, hey, I made this ingredient, cinnamon, for example, and I ground it up and it looked like it had the right color and it smelled like cinnamon and it had the right weight, or something like that. They are not tests, but rather statements of evaluation that I did make this according to the way that I sold it to you, and I'm confirming that at least at a sensory level, this is correct. That conformity is I made it right. That could also be a statement of, hey, I looked at my batch records and my batch records said that I made this right. As you can tell, that is not the same thing as a evaluation of through testing. If I say, hey, I sold you something that was supposed to be light green and it is light green, that is a statement of conformity. And if I sign it, then I'm certifying that conformity. Well, that isn't really what is being looked for. So I would say that certificates of conformity are not acceptable. Certificates of analysis are the minimum document that I would be looking for. Sometimes what you see are what are called certificates of analysis, and they are mixes. They might have statements of conformity followed by testing. And if that's the case, so be it. And then the conformity statements are nice to have. But I looked at it, or I smelled it, or I did mouthfeel, and that all felt right, or looked right, or smelled right. That's all well and good, but that is not going to get us to the place we need to be as far as evaluating dietary supplements for their efficacy. So the duplicate testing using COAs, that is something that is a part of fraud investigations. It's part of the efficacy of what our suppliers are doing. Are they actually correct in what they're doing? And so it's like, hey, is this product correct when I got the COA? And is my supplier even good enough to supply this stuff? So that's why we're doing a duplicate test with a COA. This is why my personal opinion was, once I've crossed that bar, I should be able to back off and say, look, I checked their COAs. I saw that they are doing it right. I see this similar behavior over a time period. I would think as a cost savings mechanism that I would have the right to maybe lessen the amount of testing, but that would need to be in writing, and that would need to be through a risk assessment, and have that ready to show a regulator or an auditor. And so at a basic minimum, the absolute bare minimum here is that there needs to be some testing. The word periodically shows up in the regulation. So we need to have at a bare minimum some testing. If you're going to be cost sensitive about it, then you need to do the maximum that you can afford, and you better have a comprehensive explanation of what you're doing and why it is effective. Everything coming in the door, all of the in-process checks and finished product testing is the highest risk profile here. I don't have any trust, so I'm going to test everything. If I'm backing off of that, I need it in writing. Why is this safe? What is it about this ingredient, the use of a COA, that allows me to not do incoming testing? I would like to see for clients that in writing if we are going to go and have a system in which we're defending the not testing of everything every single time. So I made a map here. I put together a dummy dietary supplement operation, the one that certainly it's closer to ideal for what we have here. So the left side of the picture here is incoming, then going and flowing down through the pre-packaging, the pre-finished product equipment. So tableting, blender, liquefier, and a couple of bulk storage tanks in that room. So like your prep room, and then being able to flow down through a different part of the building, the right side in which I have finished packaging rooms and a QA lab. Two QA labs, one for analysis and one for micro, leading then into the finished product area. And if anyone's noticed, I made it pretty quick. I don't know how we're getting stuff into the finished product area other than through the labs. That wouldn't be great. So if anyone's evaluating my construction design, certainly I'm willing to hear maybe a door between another route in that hallway, probably for the best. I went quickly. Long and short of it, besides my critique here, what we do have that is good is the movement of the ingredients in the door. So coming through those docks, I have a red dot there. We're going to be sampling at that spot. You'll notice at the top of that red arrow, we're doing our COA review for stuff when it comes in the door. So as it is going into the racks, I should be sampling product, whether I do testing or not. I am going to be doing a COA review. We're going to talk about holding product there in that receiving area. The dotted line is that once the ingredients come off of hold and they are going to go into the room where we're going to be doing product processing, we are then going to potentially have red dots, the sampling area at each piece of equipment, because depending on what I've scheduled for the day, as I'm making it, I'm going to pull a sample from that spot and do some kind of evaluation. And what I've put here is that as we flow through that red dotted arrow, we're also going through finished product. So as it moves into the finished product areas where I'm packaging, I have sample spots there, and everything is moving towards the labs for that finished product testing before I'm shipping it out. So as a result of that, when we think through coming in the door, I do my COA checks, then I'm sampling at the beginning, sampling in process, and I don't, when I sample from the packaging machines, that's my finished product. So I don't need to pull another sample from the finished product racks. So this would be good enough. Everything should end up, if I have labs, it'll end up there. If we don't have in-house lab areas, then it's going to be collected and shipped over to a laboratory for finished product testing. And that would be basically every day that I run. All right. So as I mentioned, I want to talk about hold and release as they pertain to this sampling and testing, because where I have an effective testing program, no matter how frequently I'm doing it, each time that I take a sample intended for testing, I should be putting the product on hold, waiting for those test results before it moves to the next level. Any of you who have used a QA, a quality management system, a QMS, that has like a traveler, that is how quality management systems often work, which is I finish a step, I do a quality evaluation. Once I clear that evaluation, I can move to the next step. For dietary supplements, we really are being sort of pushed in that direction by regulation and by expectation. And I want to say here that all incoming product needs to be put on hold. That is one of the regulatory requirements. So we have a quarantine of incoming products that's in the regulation. So I should be holding stuff in the door. If I don't do a testing on that the components coming in the door, then I at least need to do a sign off that I looked at the boxes. Maybe I opened one and looked at what was inside. And at that point, I can say that, yes, it was evaluated and it is the correct stuff. And now I can bring it into my system. And that quarantine should be in writing. So I should have like a hold log for incoming or electronic records that showed that it was not movable until evaluation. So, and with that, companies that do testing should put everything on hold for that incoming testing. Nothing should move until those tests come off. We can then apply those holds at any step in the process. And anytime there is a test at any step, we should hold that product as best we can. Now we'll talk about in our next picture, like what would that mean in process? That it gets a little bit kind of crazy, but the hold, by the way, that first dot is the hold at the beginning before product comes. You can establish stuff is going to be on hold when it gets here. And that can be in writing through an email. That can be a policy and procedure. Anything that comes in the door gets put into specific racks or in a specific room, and it is on hold at that point. That can save some paperwork, but you do have to demonstrate through some kind of record the time period that occurred. As I mentioned, it's best practice to hold at each step that I'm doing testing. And the practicality of doing that is difficult, to say the least. So at least at the beginning and at least at the end, if I'm pulling samples in process and I'm going to hold finished product until all of that's done, that is a process that can work. Ideally, there would be some time period before it moves to the next step. So companies that do finished product testing on everything. And so I came out of a facility that we did finished product testing on all food and dietary supplements. We just had a running hold log for everything. So everything I made every day, everything the production was making, everything that I had to print labels for, immediately went on to a hold list. And I had to move it off of that hold list when all my test results came in. So I just had a daily hold log and I just resaved it every single day so that when regulators or auditors came in, I could just show them like, dude, I have got hundreds of hold records for you. You can spend all the time you like looking at them. And by saving them every day, by moving things off as they came off of testing, it became really easy to show what that hold program is. If you are only using hold stickers and not writing it down, that is something that really is not an effective hold release program. The written records, having a log, having electronic records, that is how we justify a hold program as working as intended. The last bit here, and we're going to look at a grid in a second. The reason why hold release is a little different than just testing is because of nonconformities or customer complaints, which can trigger a hold in addition to testing. So we might be holding product separately of our testing program, and that can also go on my hold list. It can get my hold sticker, but we can have quite a bit of holds in a dietary supplement program based on testing a non-conforming product. We can have a lot of things on a hold list at any given time. So let's just look at that in a grid form, where we're talking about these hold release actions. To mirror the original grid that we looked at, which are like what kinds of testing can be done. For incoming materials, we have that testing program. That's the first dot that I put on here. The first bullet point was just like the catch-all for all of that testing. However, in addition to that, anytime there is a fraud investigation, if we're dealing with spices, honey, oils, we can expect some kind of question marks as to what we're getting. If we're dealing with very high value vitamins and minerals, there's a good chance of fraud. So we should be at least looking around for it. And where we find anything that doesn't look right at first, that fraud investigation may cause a hold. Doing that at all, even if we feel great about this stuff, having some fraud investigations in a dietary supplement facility is probably a good thing to have on record. even if at the end of those investigations, we're looking at it and saying, nope, fraud did not occur. I just didn't get the COA when the component arrived. I reached out to my supplier. They then sent one. That can be a fraud investigation. The lot codes didn't match. That happens through normal error. I can call it a fraud investigation if I was concerned that there was something untoward about it and I did some follow-up actions in investigating. That would trigger a hold. Non-conformance, the wrong stuff arrived, wrong quantities, didn't look right, all that stuff goes on hold until we fix it. In process, again, the non-conforming materials, anything in process not being made right would go on hold. Any production issues, and here it's not just a non-conforming event like the process didn't work. My blender broke. It could be I ran out of this ingredient. I thought I had enough. I didn't. So now I'm halfway through a process without the right ingredient. The work in process, it can go into like barrels, lined bins and go back out into the warehouse and wait. Now, this is exactly an area where a test, once I get that ingredient in, what does it mean for me to hold half-made product for 3 weeks while I'm waiting for that shipment of the last ingredient to come in? I go add that ingredient, reblend it. I'm probably taking a test would be really helpful. Certainly, again, if we had that in-process lab, if the lab's here in the facility, why not just probe it and see if it had any effect? If I have to send it out for a testing lab, so now I started to make a product. I ran out of an ingredient, a crucial one. I have to wait 3 weeks. Comes in, dump it into the blender, mix it up. And now I'm taking a test and I'm going to wait another 5 to 7 days for the third-party test to be done. That's hard to imagine that working in production. So as I mentioned earlier, it gets kind of crazy to do in-process holds, and especially if the testing is involved, because there are production limitations and timing that make that impractical. So how that's determined, when we're going to hold things, when we're going to test, that is often driven by what is possible from the production schedule. One other place we can do a hold is statistical process control checks. So I finished liquefying something. I'm doing a fill. So I have my liquid. I'm filling it into a bottle and I'm doing fill checks. I could actually hold for a few minutes and confirm with my QC team that the fill trends were working, and then I can release that product to final storage and shipment, or to the next step where there's going to be finished product testing. And then lastly, for the finished product, we again have nonconformities that holds can happen here. Our finished product test, if we're going to when we do our finished product testing, I think that pretty much needs to happen for most programs almost every time. So when I do my finished product testing, it goes on hold. Again, those fraud investigations. Now, what's the difference between a fraud investigation at the beginning and at the end? Well, my employees are a potential source of fraud. So even if I didn't have fraud that I thought was the case when the components came in, I might have some folks in the operation that I'm not quite feeling confident about. And if there's any shenanigans or things that don't look right during production, then I might have another fraud investigation. And then the last thing I put on here was competency evaluations. So with a testing program, or even just a sampling program, I do have an obligation on an annual basis to make sure that my people know how to sample and know what correct testing is. Even if they're shipping it out to a third-party lab, the competency evaluation is proving the people know what they're doing. That can be quite frustrating for employees who have been around a long time, but in a good, solid, well-run dietary supplement operation, there should be competency evaluation. So that means I am asking you to go take samples, and I'm going to look at how sampling was done. I'm going to talk to you about it and make sure that your basis for how those samples were taken is correct. To go along with that, the competency evaluation, there may be training that is done. So things can go on hold while training occurs or while I'm doing a competency evaluation. Those would be areas. That would be best practice to say, let's train on this today, or let me evaluate your competency. I'm going to put this product on hold until we're done with all of that. And again, that might take a day or two to finish those things up. So the hold won't necessarily be a long one, but it would be important in a best practice to do that. So I have my same picture here from before. I adjusted it to the arrows where holding occurs and where release would be required. I put my actions on the left side here so you can see these are, again, a restatement of the types of things that would occur for a hold. I added label review here, an MMR review, but those would be at the finished product area as well. I put a little purple box around the finished product doc in the QA lab for finished product evaluation. All of the testing and all of the evaluations would occur with product being moved into those final areas. In the meantime, we have a hold at the incoming dock and storage. And again, the hold would be a required quarantine, but also a test and hold for raw material in a facility that's doing incoming testing. And even if it's that periodic review of someone else's COA, every time I do that periodic check of a COA, that at a minimum would have a hold on those things while I'm testing it. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, if someone's testing everything, the holds are in that spot. I'm sampling at the door, holding stuff in this incoming warehouse, doing my test, and then it will be released. The holds are also going to be occurring in potentially, if they're in process, in the pre-production or the pre-packaging processing equipment, if I'm going to sample there and do SPC testing or evaluation, if I'm going to do some kind of efficacy test in process, then I might be holding in the production area. I have my finished product, my packaging area, holds can occur there. So if I scheduled a multi-day production run, I had the components come off of testing, and now I'm saying, hey, we're going to spend 1 day blending my ingredients, and I'm going to hold stuff in that room. I'm going to take the sample to the lab and actually prove that it's going to go off. This is such a high value item. I'm not running anything else in that room. So we could leave the components with a hold sticker on them in the room and say, okay, we made it on this date. I'm holding for evaluation. It goes into the lab at the end of the day, comes back the next morning. We're all good. Now I'm moving into the packaging room. I'm going to pre-package everything, and I'm going to take finished product tests. Theoretically, I could leave it in the packaging area, or I can take it to the finished product warehouse while my hold is in place. But again, I want to put another hold sign on there explaining when it went on hold, the date of release, and the reason for the hold and the results. So those would occur in either of those steps, but the product can either stay in those processing areas as long as they're safe, as long as they're packaged and they're not going to be affected by the rooms themselves, or I can move it to the finished product area while I wait for those tests to come off. All that's fine. And those evaluations, if I have a lab, they come in here. If I was going to send out, as I mentioned, to third-party tests, leaving it in the room while I'm waiting for tests to come off, that seems pretty impractical to leave a piece of processing equipment unused for multiple days while I'm waiting for the testing lab to get me results. So it's much harder to see that work in a third-party testing arrangement, but it could work if you have a lab in the facility. So, with all of that as context, I wanted to address this risk representation here for testing and why it is we're even talking about this. Why is this such an important part of dietary supplement operations? Well, the way that the regulations are written, in my interpretation of it, is that all dietary supplements are essentially treated as ready-to-eat products that usually do not undergo kill steps in operation. And the law, which is an older law, it really predates HACCP. Essentially, it was like, all right, you can have a carve out for these dietary supplements, provided that they have very heavy evaluation. So if we are really evaluating carefully, I don't need any one of these food safety plans. You can just have your master manufacturing record. But to go along with that, we want to see very careful evaluations. And I think that a lot of startup dietary supplement operations and a lot of the folks that they just don't want to run their business that way, leaving out the evaluation and just saying, I should be fine. Why do I have to do any of these tests or evaluations in some way or holds? The folks are just skipping the part of the arrangement. There was it is a cultural acceptance of these products are treated slightly differently than other foods in exchange for extra evaluation. But if people leave out the evaluation, then they're just asking for a freebie, and that's difficult to justify. In this chart, what I have is my normal risk chart. We have high risk, medium, and low. Dietary supplements need to be treated at the component level and finished product as high risk. That is why you test that's why a regulator would demand that you test all incoming, in process, and finished product testing. It is why we need to be looking carefully when we make it at the chances that something could go wrong. We have to act as though it's high risk. At a minimum, based on what we're seeing in industry, maybe you can get away from red and get into yellow and call it medium risk. Or at least that yellow is a high low or medium, that, hey, this stuff, I've done enough of this. I have a supplier who's been good enough that maybe I don't have to test every single time they ship me something, but I will check every year to make sure that everything makes sense. That would be a yellow. When folks do not have testing and do not evaluate the COAs, that's green, and that's essentially unacceptable in dietary supplements. In food factories, you see that behavior because I have critical safety steps. I have thermal kill steps. I have pressure. I have my acidification checks. And so I'm less concerned about some of the safety aspects of the ingredients because I'm going to take care of it through my processing steps, through my production process, and I have it on my flow chart. For dietary supplements, it's like, no. You don't forget your flow chart. You know, that's not a requirement that a regulator is going to demand to see one of those necessarily. It's good to have one, but it's technically in the rules, you're exempt from the food safety plan. And so whether you have a flow chart and hazard analysis is really dependent on the operation specifically, but you will have an evaluation. And that evaluation, if it is treated as high risk or at most a medium risk, and I have documentation to justify that, then that is a level of acceptability for running a program. So when we're thinking about how we want to present to regulators, we need to have a comprehensive plan that documents, we understand that this is high risk or we think it's a medium risk for these very specific reasons. And so this is the format of our testing program or how we evaluate it. To look at the master manufacturing record, and for those of you with dietary supplement programs, you have to have an MMR. It is the collected records for the entire operation, cleaning, ingredient checks, weight checks, calibration. The label review is in the MMR. For me, a perfect MMR is a manila folder with the label taped to the front. I have all of my records collated and stamped, or at least with a statement of MMR on it. And I have all my finished product testing in there. And as we're talking about these specific issues of COAs and testing, the COA should be in your manila folder or should be collated with the MMR or your test results. They should all be there together. That's how you get a regulator to nod along with the choices you've made as opposed to challenging them. All of those incoming screens for ingredients, if those are included in your MMR, that answers the question of how is evaluation done. All of the in-process testing, any statistical process controls, those should be included in an MMR. And then the finished product results and any release statement or review of records, all those go with the MMR. So as we think about these, do I use COAs only? Do I use testing? It really is like another way of asking, what records am I putting in my MMR to go with the other supporting records that I made this stuff correct? And with what I'm saying, that's all the behavior of a high-risk industry, which is what dietary supplements are really thought of through regulation. So we're here at the end. We're at the last 10 minutes. I'm going to leave a few minutes for questions to see if anyone had any or have any. But for my final thoughts, I really want to focus on what is your plan? What is the plan for when a regulator comes in, or whether you go, or if you're going to go through an audit? What's the plan we're showing people? When folks get into conflict with outsiders coming in and evaluating the program, most frequently the issue is a lack of a systematic approach to all of this. The businesses that have a very cogent, systematic approach are often finding that they get along with the people who are evaluating it, that it is comprehensive and folks have trust in them. When there are gaps in testing programs, when it is inconsistently applied, or where there is not a good reasoning or rationalization of what caused us to make these choices in how often I test. Do I test incoming? Do I test finished product? It's usually just a lack of thoughtfulness in what we're doing here. And frankly, the real reason is I wanted to make more money. I wanted more profit. And the costs of testing, the costs of building a lab, were going to eat into my bottom line. I didn't want to do that. Well, the testing plan, you can test at all steps, in which case there will probably not be any conflict with anybody for the entirety of your business. If you're doing less than that, the answer to why can never be it's too expensive. That's not an excuse. In the business world, I can't afford it is an excuse. Get out of the business. I don't care if you're selling sneakers, if you have a used car lot, or if you're doing dietary supplements. Too expensive to do it right? Bye. Marketplace is going to remove you and add a new person to do it who can't afford it. It's been that way since the beginning. Those approaches to business aren't changing. So if you're going to be in this industry, you need to have a comprehensive plan. You can risk assess out some of the responsibility for testing based on scientifically valid reasons for, I don't need to spend all of this money. And that can go to your bottom line. Great. If that happens, fantastic. But you cannot say, well, I wanted to do right, but my risk assessment is it's too expensive to do right. That's not a risk assessment. That's a budgetary assessment. The hold releases to go along with this, they need to be very rigid. You should have extensive holds in a dietary supplement operation, and the release should be written every time. If you have, again, a good testing program that is not limited by cost, or at least there is a systematic approach that is reasonable, and there's holds and releases to go with that, again, you're going to have a very positive experience when an outsider comes in, regulator or certifying auditor, looking at your program. And lastly, those test results, definitely include those in the finished records for what you're making. That is the easiest way to demonstrate quickly and easily a comprehensive approach to what you've been doing from an operational standpoint. So with that said, I hope that this was a helpful discussion. I hope that it helped you wrap your mind around, like, what are the boundary lines of dietary supplements and how this works. Does anyone have any questions? We have a couple minutes, and I'll leave a minute or two. Thank you, Phoebe, for going forward. If you want to see any other videos, downloads, whatever, our website, kellermanconsulting.com, has those. These webinars are posted. By the way, I forgot to mention, the video of this is going to be sent out. So if there was anything about this that you wanted to see again, we'll be making this recording available. If you have any questions, this is how to find myself, our company, info at Kellerman Consulting, and our 1-800 number. It does not go directly to me. You have to talk to some other people, but it'll get you to our company, and I'm here. It was wonderful. Thank you so much for those of you who were here listening. And those of you in the future watching a video, I hope this was helpful, and uh, we'll hope to hear from you. Thanks so much. Take care.